Tonight, the secrets behind Iran's Manhattan Project.
They were stripping the identification so that the New York banks did not know that this was Iranian money.
And Iran's back door to the West.
His direct quote to me was, "But Mr. John, those are your sanctions, not ours."
Plus, a brand new United States senator is welcomed to Washington. A senator who didn't receive a single vote.
You're a seat warmer, true or
No,
untrue?
not true. I'm going to try to get 6 years worth of work in a 16-month period.
We'll bring you the news next on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. According to new reports, Iran is on the brink of developing a nuclear bomb, a nightmare scenario for Washington and a game-changing accomplishment for Tehran. And not just because the Islamic Republic beat the odds to gather the elusive know-how and rare materials from around the world. Even more surprising is how easily Iran used America's financial markets to pay for these materials. Black market suppliers want U.S. dollars, which are supposed to be nearly impossible for the Iranians to get, since Washington has labeled Tehran the world's top sponsor of terrorism. Sanctions have been in place for decades, trying to isolate the Iranians, but as you will see and hear tonight, those sanctions are not only not working, but also Western banks have been helping the Iranians get around the rules and get their hands on enormous amounts of money, enough to build a nuclear weapon that Iran could hold over the U.S. and its allies.
Few believe Iran when it says its nuclear program is for civilian use. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has made a public show of testing long-range missiles, and experts say his government may be as close as a few months from enriching weapons-grade uranium. But how did Iran manage to get and spend billions of dollars in U.S. currency on the materials it needed, in spite of what are supposed to be ever-tightening sanctions? It happened right here in New York, the very heart of American capitalism. And that doesn't sit well with Manhattan's district attorney.
How much money are we talking?
We're talking about 340 million that what they call terminated in the United States,
Right.
But then several billion went through New York banks and went elsewhere.
Several billion.
Yeah.
Now, have you seen any correlation between this time period and Iran's alleged progress in its nuclear weapons program?
Well, I mean, I think they coincide.
Robert Morgenthau is the 90-year-old soon-to-retire district attorney of Manhattan.
Were arrested on an indictment charging them with...
Over more than 30 years in the position, he's defined his career by unraveling sophisticated financial crimes. But this case had special implications for the lives of New Yorkers.
Going back to the lesson of 9/11, I mean, New York is always going to be a prime target for terrorists. We've got to be on the alert here to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to make it difficult.
Morgenthau first picked up the billion-dollar money trail at this nondescript office tower on New York's famed Fifth Avenue. For years, federal officials suspected the building's owner had ties to Tehran, but they did nothing. Morgenthau had heard the same thing, but felt he couldn't afford to wait any longer, and his investigators began digging.
So you got to looking into it, and what'd you find?
Well, just basically that they were, we thought, an agent of the Iranian government.
In reporters' vernacular, that would be serving as a front organization.
Right.
Morgenthau's team of investigators discovered the building's real owner is Bank Melli. It's Iran's largest bank, owned by the Iranian government and on a U.S. and European watch list for allegedly playing a part in financing terrorism and nuclear proliferation. For some 20 years, the building had been a cash bonanza for Iran. Unsuspecting tenants were paying millions to the front company that ran the building. But faced with a wall of sanctions, the Iranian bank couldn't get the dollars out of New York without help. and Morgenthau discovered a surprising accomplice, the venerable British bank Lloyd's TSB. And that was just one of many services Lloyd's was providing the Iranian government.
Let me just jump right in and say, what was Lloyd's TSB doing for Iran?
They were stripping the identification so that the New York banks did not know that this was Iranian money. They were just physically stripping the identification on the wire transfers. And they had a room with two people in it, and their only job was to make sure that there was no connection with Iran on these wire transfers.
It was classic money laundering, made easy in this era of computerized virtual transactions.
Melly Bank PLC has an account with Lloyd's.
Adam Kaufman, Morgenthau's chief investigator in the case, explained how the scheme worked.
This is something that we put together that represents the type of messages that we saw in the investigation. This is a message from Melly Bank PLC, London, and it's saying to Lloyd's, send this money to a U.S. bank. What's very significant, and this is what we see again and again and again, is at the bottom. What it says is, please do not mention our name to any bank in the USA.
Lloyd's TSB branches in London and Dubai would accept deposits of Iranian rials from Bank Melli and other Iranian banks, disguise or remove information from electronic records that indicated that the source of the money was Iran, and then transfer the money electronically to New York. And why were the Iranians so eager to get American dollars? The theory driving an even deeper investigation is that when Iran goes shopping on the international weapons market, the black market sellers want to do deals in greenbacks, not British pounds, not Japanese yen, and definitely not Iranian rials. For years, Lloyd's helped Iran launder billions of dollars, and nobody noticed.
It seemed to me some people at the very least had been asleep on the job.
Andrew McKinley is a member of the British Parliament. We spoke near his country home outside Belfast. He told us that he's surprised it was an American district attorney and not his own government that brought down the Lloyd's money laundering operation.
The British government are saying that there was not a breach of United Kingdom law. I'm frankly amazed by that.
Even more amazing to McKinley was how seemingly brazen Lloyd's was in helping Iran. It was a top-down operation, so ingrained in the bank's routine that there was even a step-by-step manual describing how to launder the Iranian money.
It wasn't some maverick. It was done with full knowledge and full consent at a very high level in Lloyd's TSB. So, to put it quite frankly, it stinks.
McKinley was outraged that the British government appeared to be letting the politically influential bank off the hook. He lashed out at Prime Minister Gordon Brown on the floor of the House of Commons.
I think it's a pathetic response of the United Kingdom, and I say I'm disappointed with the Prime Minister. He should have told the Treasury, look, for once, you really got to look into this. This will not do. I'm not going to let him get away with the washing of hands on this issue. It's a very serious matter.
He says that even years into the war on terror, the U.S. and its allies have missed a major gap in their security.
Even in the United States, with all their sophisticated surveillance of the financial sector, financial transactions, intelligence gathering and so on, it seems that this scheme was rumbled almost by accident and at a relatively low level in the Justice Administration. Now, full marks to those who discovered it, but it does raise questions for us all, both in North America and in Europe, as to how sophisticated our intelligence and security operations are. It seems to me they were seriously flawed in this area because it went on for so long.
It went on for 12 years, ending in 2004. But despite these startling revelations, McKinley says his government has been strangely satisfied in letting Morgenthau and U.S. authorities lead the probe of Lloyd's, a passivity he attributes to Great Britain's own financial situation.
I think there has been an element of sweeping this under the carpet or a decision we will not go there, simply because of the wider banking crisis, which was hitting London very hard at the turn of the year.
Back in New York, Morgenthau says even U.S. federal officials were wary of his investigation.
Well, going back a bit, when you first started working this case, did you get total, complete cooperation from the State Department, from the British Foreign Office, from the Treasury in both countries?
Yeah. It was a mixed bag. Mixed bag.
Too aggressive to say that in some cases they were reluctant?
I would say they were not enthusiastic about our bringing a criminal proceeding. They thought it ought to be left to the civil process.
The federal government wasn't the only one that preferred behind-the-scenes negotiations to headline-grabbing prosecutions. To avoid a potentially embarrassing trial, Lloyds admitted wrongdoing and agreed to pay a $350 million fine. Back on Fifth Avenue, federal investigators finally have stepped in to try to seize the Iranian-owned building, nabbing the director of the alleged front company, a charity known as the Alavi Foundation. His name is Farshid Jahedi, and our cameras caught up with him outside the federal courthouse in Manhattan. He's charged with destroying documents related to the case, but he maintains his innocence.
Lloyd's bankers will be spared personal criminal charges in the United States, at least for now. That could change if the probe ties their money laundering finally and directly to Iran's weapons programs. Under the settlement, the bank has opened its records to investigators seeking to further unravel Iran's secret weapons financing activities. But what prevents Lloyd's from laundering money for Iran again in the future, especially in a recession when banks are desperate for business? We asked Lloyd's for an interview, but they declined. Through a spokesman, Lloyd's said they have, quote, undertaken a range of significant steps to further enhance our compliance programs, end quote. But it's not just Lloyd's. Morgenthau says he's expanded his investigation of Iranian money laundering to several other New York banks. He suspects and believes he can prove that some of the banks, like Lloyd's, may have known what they were doing, while others may have been fooled by dummy companies working for the Iranian government.
Mr. Morgenthau said one new case will be made public within days that involves a bank in New York even bigger than Lloyd's. And a top assistant to the district attorney told us investigators were also closing in on another case with direct national security implications. They are probing an Iranian company with alleged ties to the country's nuclear weapons program. Investigators say they believe the Shahid Bakari Industrial Group, a company blacklisted by the U.S. government, set up shell companies in Dubai as a way of stealthily accessing New York banks. Through these banks, Shahid Bakari allegedly made payments to an Asian manufacturer of electronics used in centrifuges, the kind of centrifuges Iran is building to enrich uranium. These shell companies also allowed Shahid Bakari to skirt Asian export authorities looking to cut off banned shipments to Iran. In this case, investigators told us they believe the American banks were unaware that they were helping Iran. If true, the scheme would be similar to another jarring discovery that Morgenthau's team recently brought to light. In an indictment handed up in April, Morgenthau charged Chinese arms trader Li Fangwei with using dummy companies in New York to procure crucial banned materials for Iran's weapons program. Li's company had been on a Treasury Department watch list, but he used more than a dozen aliases to evade sanctions.
And there are things that I had never heard of, like miraging steel, which is a specially hard steel suitable for use in the long-range missiles and also in the nuclear enrichment program. Mm-hmm. We found on the shopping list tantalum, which is a specially hard metal. I'd never heard of it, frankly. Used in roadside bombs because it has an armor-piercing quality. Then we found, discussion of accelerometers, gyroscopes. Gyroscopes used both in the uranium enrichment program, but also in long-range missiles.
It sounds like it was a pretty long shopping list.
It was.
Morgenthau says this was one of Iran's top covert weapons procurement operations.
Mr. District Attorney, thank you for being with us, sir.
And now the federal government is calling on the Manhattan District Attorney to guide the country's strategy on Iran.
And we've got to intensify our efforts to embargo the shipment of WMD, as it's called.
Iran is very good. They understand what these sanctions are about. They're smart, and they are learning how to evade them.
Morgenthau wasn't the only one frustrated by America's single-minded reliance on decades-old sanctions. As counterterrorism advisor to President George W. Bush, Juan Zarate led a quieter effort to freeze Iranian money flow.
The entire world is now required to be vigilant, required to block assets, required to
He calls
travel.
the strategy smart financial power. And over the past 2 years, it has driven more than 80 foreign banks to drop business with Iran.
Part of the strategy involves publicly identifying international banks that knowingly or unknowingly help the Iranians. Describe some of the political difficulties in making this work, particularly when it comes to our allies.
I think for the most part, the way the U.S. government has handled this is to handle this behind the scenes, to handle it quietly with governments, and also to meet directly with the banks, to express the concerns that the U.S. government, in particular the Treasury Department, has about the types of transactions and financial activity that these banks are helping to facilitate with respect to Iran.
Like most Iran watchers, Zarate believes strongly that Iranian banks are fundamentally tied to the country's nuclear weapons program and Iran's support of terrorist organizations.
They are trying to support terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad around the world. And we know that they run businesses for precisely this reason, that they have front companies throughout the world, not just in the region, but throughout the world that are dedicated to just this. And so the danger is you don't know what the Iranians are doing with some of these transactions.
A crucial part of the new federal strategy is to identify Iranian financial institutions and front companies and flag them on a public blacklist, a list that grows longer each month. The list makes it harder for private firms to be duped by dummy companies tied to Iranian banks. And those Western banks that have been able to feign ignorance in the past now will have to pay the price, with hits to their reputations and potentially with criminal charges.
And that kind of soft, silent suasion, as I call it, has actually been quite effective, where you've had banks making decisions on their own without regulatory pressure, but understanding the full field of information available to it, have decided to either shut down their transactions with Iran or to scale back to a large extent.
Keeping in mind, you say that part of it is to keep it kind of below the radar screen. Can you give me an example of where this has been used?
Well, I don't want to get into details as to some of the more sensitive meetings that have happened, but I will tell you that, for example, you've had some of the Swiss banks, UBS and Credit Suisse, making decisions to stop doing business with Iran, precisely because they could not assure themselves that they understood the types of financial transactions and activities that the Iranians were engaged in, and so made a decision on their own to cut off the financial ties they had with Iran.
And for banks that don't get the message, Zarate believes high-profile criminal cases, like those in New York, will serve as an important deterrent. And that's just what Morgenthau wants.
Mr. District Attorney, you have such a long record. Looking at your whole record, is this one of the most important cases you've ever prosecuted?
I think it is. I think it's extremely important.
And the reason?
Because it's the safety of New Yorkers and the safety of U.S. troops in Afghanistan and Iraq and the whole stability of the Middle East.
With the U.S. government finally cracking down on Iranian money flowing through the United States and Europe, the Iranian regime is looking to exploit other weaknesses in global trade. Mr. Morgenthau recently spoke out about increasingly cozy ties between Iran and Venezuela and warned that Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez could be using his country's banks to help Iran access the U.S. financial system. Now, coming up next, we take you to another country where you'll see American efforts against Iran openly flaunted. that story when we return. Missed an edition of Dan Rather Reports? Or just want to see one again? We're now available on iTunes, so check us out. Now, from the dark corners of the world's financial markets to the bright desert light of Dubai, a kingdom where Iranian money also flows quite freely despite America's best efforts. Of the 7 kingdoms that make up the United Arab Emirates, Dubai has set itself apart from the others by becoming a 21st century monument to capitalism, an opulent oasis of high-end hotels, luxury shopping malls in the heart of the religiously conservative Middle East. In the past decade, an orgy of foreign spending fueled one of history's biggest construction booms, one that has included the world's tallest building and 2 of the world's largest malls, which have famously defied the desert with everything from an indoor ski slope to a 2.6 million gallon shark tank. There's even an archipelago of islands, each up for grabs to anyone with $50 million to spare. But there's a dark side to Dubai's explosion from a backwater pearling village into a major international commercial hub. American counterterrorism officials say the kingdom's freewheeling business climate has made it one of the easiest places on earth to launder money, an unregulated haven that Iran has exploited for years.
As a criminal investigator, I would in effect drool when I went out there because there was just so much work to do.
Former CIA officer and Treasury investigator John Cassara immersed himself in Dubai's underworld and spent quite a bit of time at its busy wharf on Dubai Creek, known locally as Smuggler's Creek. It's the point of departure for the hundreds of rickety wooden boats, known as dhows, that regularly ply the narrow crease of the Persian Gulf to Iran.
The site is actually incredible. The colors, the smells, the hub of commerce, it's an overwhelming sight. But what concerns me again is that there's very, very little inspection and control about what goes in and what goes out of these dhows. And it's very easy for the smuggling of yesteryear to continue today.
Are you suggesting or not that with this kind of traffic, there's very little of any inspection, very little of any control, that if you're looking to smuggle in everything from explosive devices to nuclear weapons components, that close to Iran, with this ancient system of using the dhows, it would be pretty easy?
I'm trying to be fair to the Emirati authorities, but yes, it's a concern.
Just this past August, United Arab Emirates authorities seized a cargo ship bound for Iran that was reportedly loaded with weapons from North Korea. It's easy to imagine how much doesn't get caught, because on any given day, the wharf is lined with hundreds of dhows heavy with everything from refrigerators and cars to food to shampoo. The crews are almost entirely Iranian. But you don't have to wait long to spot American-made products bound for Iran, goods forbidden for export to Iran under a decades-old embargo, like these Black & Decker kitchen appliances. Nothing stops this fleet of dhows from crossing the 100 miles to Iran daily. It's deeply troubling for those in Washington intent on isolating the belligerent Ahmadinejad regime. In a 2007 report, the Government Accountability Office described Dubai's freight forwarding to Iran as a, quote, considerable problem that undercut attempts to cut off the Islamic Republic from the rest of the world.
When it comes to smuggling and embargo busting, where does Dubai fit in?
Dubai is basically the Hong Kong of that area. Years ago, the People's Republic of China, the communist Chinese, if you will, used Hong Kong kind of as a front to procure goods and services, used it basically as a way to deal with the West. The same thing is happening today with Dubai.
Kasara, who worked undercover as an arms trader for 2 years, says Dubai's live and let live business climate has made the kingdom a magnet for an assortment of underworld figures. Everyone from Russian mobsters to the notorious Pakistani scientist A.Q. Khan, who led a network of nuclear arms traders, to the terrorist who planned the 9/11 attacks. Since 9/11, all eyes in Washington have turned to Dubai, though the heightened vigilance and diplomacy there has done little to slow the kingdom's trade with Iran.
Nothing has changed. And regarding sanctions, I remember speaking to an Iranian freight forwarder. I was following that proverbial money trail and commodity trail that went from the United States to Dubai onto Iran. And we were talking about sanctions, and his direct quote to me was, "But Mr. John, those are your sanctions, not ours."
Ironically, it was these U.S. sanctions that brought the latest wave of Iranians here, to the nearest point of access to the Western economy. In the 6 years since the U.S. ramped up sanctions, the population of Iranians in Dubai has doubled to just under 500,000, and the value of Iranian assets in Dubai has grown to as much as $300 billion.
We have about 300 flights per week going back and forth to Iran, from Iran to UAE and back.
Nasir Hashimpour represents thousands of Iranian businessmen as spokesman for Dubai's Iranian Business Council. He says Farsi-speaking Iranians have long formed a visible part of Dubai's society. Throughout the city, there are Iranian Shiite mosques, bazaars, restaurants, a hospital. Even Dubai's royal family is said to have some Persian blood. With such deep ties, Hashimpour says Dubai has no reason to cave to pressure from the United States to sever its ties with the Iranian businesses he represents.
Dubai is the hub of the business of the Middle East, and it's going to be the hub of the business for a long time. And I believe with the vision of the government that the government of UAE and Dubai has, they are much better off than a lot of other countries. And I don't think that the pressure of United States, to be honest, has made any company to be closed in here.
America has been unrelenting in its pressure on Dubai to cut back on trade with Iran. President Bush personally visited Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum in 2006, and Treasury officials have traveled to the kingdom more than 10 times in the past 2 years in their push to get local business people to cut ties with Iranian banks. John Kasara says it's long overdue. It took the attacks of 9/11 to get anyone in Washington to see the kingdom for what it was, a hub of shadowy commerce.
For 4 consecutive years, I personally wrote proposals to the hierarchy of the United States Customs Service, going up to the Commissioner of Customs. We need to open up an office in the Middle East, specifically singling out Dubai as the very best location.
Well, when you made these recommendations up the chain of command to the Customs Division of the Treasury Department at that time, was it not?
Correct.
Okay. When you made these recommendations, what response did you get, or did you get any response?
The response that came back down unofficially is we just don't think Dubai is a priority for us right now.
The federal government has since caught on. In 2006, President Bush opened the Iran Regional Presence Office in this Dubai office tower, a small listening post where diplomats monitor Iran from the next best place outside Tehran, where the U.S. Embassy has been closed since the 1979 hostage crisis. Despite improved U.S. efforts to monitor Iranian money in Dubai, there remain many black holes.
There are approximately 7,000 or 8,000 Iranian businesses in Dubai. Now, a lot of these are the proverbial import-export concern, freight forwarding concern. A lot of them, quite candidly, are front companies set up by the Iranian government in order to procure prohibited goods and technologies, and they're very effective.
But that's not all. Tucked away in Dubai's old quarter is a shadow banking system operating completely off the international radar. These family-run, unregulated money transfer shops are known as hawalas. Some are well marked, others are simply run out of rug and clothing stores. Terrorism experts say they are dangerous havens for illicit finance. And indeed, Al-Qaeda made good use of shops like these, spiriting money through Dubai to fund the 9/11 attacks. About 8 years ago, John Cassara traveled to Dubai with ranking Department of Justice and Treasury officials. The goal of that trip was to push Emirati officials to better regulate the hawalas. He said the Emiratis seemed receptive, but that the money transfer shops, even today, remain an ungoverned financial wilderness.
This is extremely hard to trace. With
Yes,
a bank,
it is.
you have a paper trail.
Correct.
With Western Union, you'd have a paper trail.
Correct.
This system don't have it.
It's not like in the United States, you go into a financial institution and you can subpoena all these records and it's made available for you. Hawala exists because of trust and basically because of secrecy. It is also the proverbial crack in the Western financial system, as Osama bin Laden himself calls. Very difficult for law enforcement to penetrate these operations.
And just as Dubai's open docks allow Iran to move goods in and out of the country, the hawalas provide another avenue for Iranian cash to flow around the world, again circumventing U.S. pressure and sanctions.
Can I withdraw money on a credit card? What?
There is always a way to conturn this kind of embargo.
Iranian businessman Esfandiar Rashid Zadeh knows. He was vice director of Iran's central bank at the start of the revolutionary government. And he says that sanctions and the new pressure campaign against Iranian banks have hurt ordinary businessmen more than they've hurt the revolutionary government. We met him at one of Dubai's many Iranian restaurants, packed with lunchtime diners.
Putting pressure on the Iranian banking sector. Who is dealing with the Iranian banking sector? Of course, a part of it's the government of Iran, but the other part are the people.
Rashid Zadeh may have a bit of a chip on his shoulder. The U.S. Treasury Department recently placed him and his business on a blacklist for allegedly running a front for Bank Melli, the same Iranian bank that allegedly owns the skyscraper in New York. Rashid Zadeh says he has nothing to do with Iran's government, but his Persia Equity Fund is the only agency licensed to represent foreign investors in Iran's stock market. And he defiantly says that despite all the pressure from Washington, Dubai remains the best place to find clients.
Dubai is the window to the rest of the world for Iran. Having said that, within this window, there are different kind of activity. Mine is I want to be a kind of platform for Iranian investment coming outside the country and international investment coming to Iran.
Rashid Zadeh told us Iran's government and its savvy businessmen will always be several steps ahead of U.S. sanctions.
This embargo started in '79. Now, after 30 years, where are we?
Do the sanctions work?
In my opinion, sanctions are a tool in the toolbox. I think they are prone to corruption. I think they hurt the wrong people. I think they hurt the common people and don't really punish the ruling elites that they're designed to go after.
Cassara told me his years of digging in Dubai show him sanctions raise the cost of doing business for the average Iranian, but when it comes to the Iranian government, it's a different story.
If the point of sanctions and designations is to allow our politicians to posture, then there's nothing wrong with that, and that's fine. And sanctions and designations, I applaud what's going on. But Mr. Rather, if the point of sanctions and designations is to foster a change of attitude or a change in way of doing business, they simply don't work.
The Kingdom of Dubai has worked hard to remain friendly with Iran and Washington. A tough feat as tension continues to grow between the two rivals. And with Dubai's economy reeling from the world financial crisis, it's unlikely to cut off its largest trade partner even under intense pressure from Washington.
So there's just a balancing act, if you will, how far they can go in one direction or the other. That said, so many years now after 9/11, I think it's time for the Emiratis to actually take specific concrete steps to back up what they say they're going to do. So far, they've done just enough to keep the West off their back.
The worldwide recession we are experiencing has left banks across the world starving for deposits. It's conceivable some will be seduced by Iran's considerable oil money, hedging that they won't get caught. With stakes as high as a nuclear-armed Iran, you can be sure everyone from federal investigators on down to Manhattan's next district attorney will be watching. And so will we. So please keep tuning in for updates on this important story. Next up on our program, going from private citizen to a representative of the people, 18 million people. And finally tonight, politics. At a time when Congress has seldom if ever been more partisanly divided and the issues have never been more important, health care, wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, Iran becoming a nuclear power, a withering economy at home, and record government spending, the list goes on and on. There are 5 United States senators who didn't receive a single vote to get into office.
They are Roland Burris, Democrat of Illinois. He was appointed to fill Barack Obama's seat when Obama was elected president. Ted Kaufman, Democrat. He was appointed by the governor of Delaware to fill Joe Biden's seat when Biden was elected vice president. Michael Bennet, Democrat. He was appointed by the governor of Colorado to fill Ken Salazar's seat when Salazar was confirmed as Secretary of the Interior. Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat. She was appointed by the governor of New York to fill the seat vacated by Hillary Clinton when Clinton took over as Secretary of State. And now George Lemieux of Florida is the latest. He's a Republican and a lawyer from Tallahassee who was appointed by Governor Charlie Crist to fill the seat vacated by the resigned Mel Martinez. He's never held public office, but Lemieux knows politics and the governor. He ran Crist's 2006 campaign and was his chief of staff until December 2007. Governor Crist has announced he's running in 2010 for the seat he just appointed Lemieux to fill. After working for the governor, Lemieux ran a Florida law firm and authored a weekly multimedia newsletter called The Lemieux Report, where he discussed hot topics in the Sunshine State. Watch this excerpt on YouTube from late August.
Topic 1, who will the governor choose? Who will Governor Crist appoint to the United States Senate? It's the question everyone's asking. So while we sit back and wait for the announcement, some sitting more anxiously than others, including me, bottom line, the opportunity to receive an appointment to the United States Senate is the opportunity of a lifetime.
It was just a few days later when he found out who that person would be.
And I got a call from the governor's chief of staff saying the governor wants to see you in Tallahassee. You need to come back. So I said, why does the governor want to see me? I was trying to probe. And they said, just need to come back. So I flew back. I did not tell my wife I was flying back because I did not want to worry her while I was on the trip. And I got to the governor's mansion. The governor looked at me and said, I want you to serve the people, which was a tremendously humbling and moving moment for me, thinking of what this job means and what good works you can do here. But then he called my wife. Actually, I got her on the phone. I said, look, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. And the governor got on and said, your husband's going to be a United States Senator. So after that, I came home, and she greeted me at the door, and we both cried.
40-year-old George Lemieux had just signed on to represent in the Senate the 18 million residents of Florida, and he would become the 111th Congress's youngest senator. Within days, it was off to Washington with his wife and 3 young sons in tow. One of their first stops, his new office in the Russell Senate Office building.
What are your first impressions, sir?
Well, it's just incredibly humbling to have this great honor, and I'm looking forward to the work ahead.
If the senator designee will now present himself at the desk.
Then to the Senate chamber in the Capitol, under the Great Dome, where he's sworn in by the Vice President.
Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic?
And then it was off for his first meeting with the press.
I don't have a firm position yet because I just got sworn in. So we're going to wait and listen and learn. Okay? Thank you very much.
I caught up with him the next day, dashing meeting to meeting, just as he learned he was about to get a call from the White House.
Do we have a phone for the call?
When did you learn the president might call you this afternoon?
Just about 30 minutes ago, the White House called to schedule a time. So.
What do you think? He wants to talk about health care?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's the President of the United States. I've never received a phone call from the President.
Well, you've been around long enough to know that if things worked a certain way, you could be one of the one or two decisive votes in the public health care.
We'll have to see.
A lot of important things to be dealt with in the United States Senate, you say. There are those who think that the next 16-month period may be one of the most important in the modern era. In your mind, what are the most important issues?
Well, it's interesting that you would say that, Dan, because Governor Voinovich, Senator Voinovich from Ohio, said the same thing to me. He said, you will be here only for a brief time, but it might be the most important time to be here because of these important issues. I think obviously health care is going to be the first issue that we tackle. I had the opportunity, although it was before I was sworn in, to attend the President's speech on Wednesday evening where he put some more specifics, I guess, on the table of what his health care proposal is. I think that's going to be issue one that we're going to tackle. I think the larger issue that we're going to have to face for any of these proposals is the situation of the national debt and the national deficit. I'm very concerned as the father of 3 small boys, Max, Taylor, and Chase, 6, 4, and 2, of what the future is going to look like for them and what we're going to be able to face in the future. Are they going to have a country that has the same opportunities that I've been able to enjoy and that my wife Mikey's been able to enjoy? I'm very concerned about an almost $12 trillion national debt and how we're going to tackle that.
You attended the President's speech in the gallery. You were not yet sworn in. Were you impressed by it?
I was. I mean, he's a very good orator, and I think he tried to lay out a vision on healthcare. There were some things about the speech that I liked. I liked his idea about an exchange, an idea that you would say to the insurance companies, here are these almost 50 million Americans who need insurance. We're going to tell you what has to be in the insurance policy for them, what kind of, catastrophic health care, preventative, whatever the components would be. Go out and give us a proposal and bid for them. We did something like that in Florida. Governor Chris did with Cover Florida, which is a very similar type process. That's a market-driven approach to health care. I think that's something that Republicans should embrace.
You ready to vote for a health care bill, knowing that there's certainly perhaps a majority in your party who doesn't want to vote for almost any bill?
Well,
or would you agree with that?
It depends on what's in the bill. And we haven't seen a specific proposal from the White House. We've heard a speech and lots of discussion about it. I hope that the White House will put forward a specific plan. If they don't, we're going to be dealing with plans from the House and the Senate. And there's a lot more than just that exchange idea. There's this, there's the public option, there's this, which is, a single payer system.
You think it needs a public option?
Well, I'm concerned about a public option, Dan. I'm concerned that we put the government in the business of being in charge of, what they say, 1/6 of the federal economy, or the economy of this country would be part of the federal government's domain. That gives me concerns, especially in light of what I just mentioned with our national debt. I think we have to be doing less in government. I think we have to provide a solution for the American people where we're going to have more access, and hopefully we can lower the cost of health care, because that's what I hear from people in Florida is how expensive health care is. I just want to make sure that the solution isn't worse than the problem.
You've been seen and cast, both publicly and otherwise, as a, quote, moderate Republican. Do you see yourself as that?
I think I'm a common sense conservative. The reason why I entered into public service, and I'm so pleased to be in this position, is I like to think of myself as a problem solver. I think we in government should be here to help try to fix problems for the people of this country. And, we call me moderate or call me conservative. I'm going to work with Republicans. I'll work with Democrats, whomever wants to work with me to try to solve the problems that we can all agree upon. There's plenty we disagree on, but there's a lot we do agree on. I'd rather try to work on the stuff we agree on first.
Well, sometimes when you say liberal, conservative, moderate, it's confusing to people. They don't know what those things are. Are you a follower of Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Lou Dobbs?
Well, I'm a follower of Ronald Reagan. I'm a follower of Charlie Crist, my governor in Florida. I believe in less government, less spending, less taxes, more freedom. I think that the private sector can usually do things better. Not always, as we've seen. I think there is a role for government, but when government does the work that it does, it needs to do so efficiently and effectively. So I think there needs to be a balance. But when we do things here in government, we should be consumer or customer focused. I mean, these people who put the elected officials in office, they're the boss, and we need to serve them. So we have to do what we do well, but we shouldn't try to do too much.
Let's go down to some other issues. Immigration is a big issue in Florida.
Yes, sir.
A lot of, how do you feel about that? You have any strong feelings about what needs to be done, if anything?
Well, I'm hopeful that some solution can be reached. I know that it was debated and it was a lot of difficulty last time, and you had a lot of important people on both sides of the aisle trying to come together to get that done, and it couldn't be done. So I know that it's going to come up again. I think we have to protect our borders as a country. It's essential to do that. But we also have to figure out about these 12 million or so Americans that are here, how we're going to be able to, integrate them, or if they're going to have to return to their countries and maybe come back on a guest pass or work visa. They're difficult issues, but we need to find some kind of permanent solution, and we're going to have to work together as statesmen in order to get there.
Work as statesmen. There's a broad theory in the country that this is impossible in Washington now, that the atmosphere between Republicans and Democrats is so toxic that you can talk that way all you want. When it gets down to it, let me put it to you this way, that the more conservative, some would say right-wing members of your party, are going to put so much pressure on you as a appointed senator that there's no such thing as trying to reach a reasonable compromise. You agree with that?
It hasn't been my experience, but it's only day two. I've had a chance to meet with several of the senators, Democrat and Republican alike, and the reception that I've received from them has been warm and embracing, no matter what side of the aisle they're on. I'm here to solve problems, and if I can disagree with someone without being disagreeable.
It's been written that you're a seat warmer. Not a very elegant phrase, but nonetheless, and you know what that means in politics. You've been around politics a long time. That you're here just to keep the seat warm for Governor Crist. True or
no? Not true. This is an extraordinary opportunity for me, and I feel like I'm one of the most fortunate people in the world to have the opportunity to serve in the United States Senate for 16 months. And I'm going to try to get 6 years worth of work in a 16-month period. I don't know what my reputation will be when my time to leave the United States Senate is over, but I hope it is that I was the hardest working person here.
Well, you helped not only help Governor Crist get elected, you ran his campaign for all intents and purposes. Point out one place where you differ with the governor in terms of policy.
Well, I haven't focused on the differences between the governor and I. I can tell you that in the years that I worked with the governor shoulder to shoulder, there would be times we would disagree on policy, and I would let my opinion be known to him, but that was a little different situation because I was his chief of staff or I was his deputy attorney general when he was the attorney general. And in that position, you give your advice and then the principal makes the decision. I'm sure we will have differences of opinion as things come up on different issues, and that's fine. I mean, Ronald Reagan used to say, if you agree with me 90% of the time, you must be my friend. So while we will agree on a lot of things, there'll be some things we disagree on.
Well, in the language people understand, is Governor Crist going to be calling the shots for you as a U.S. Senator during these 16 months?
I'm my own man. The people are going to call the shots, and my conscience and what I think is right are going to call the shots. So I certainly have a great relationship with the governor, as I do with other elected officials in Florida, and I'm going to be talking with them to seek their advice and counsel on these issues, as you would expect that I should. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I think is right and listen to the people of Florida. So, I'm here and I'm in the Senate, and I get to do a lot of important things. And when I go home, I'm there with those three boys, and that's really front and center for me, is to think about them and how this wonderful experience of a year and 4 months, what it's going to mean for them. And really, when I'm making these decisions, I'm going to be thinking about those three boys and all the rest of the kids in this country, and hopefully we're going to make a better place for them.
Senator, thank you for your time.
Dan, always a pleasure.
Talk again.
Yes, sir.
Have you gotten used to people calling you Senator? You're a United States Senator.
Not yet.
The newest and youngest, Senator George Lemieux. We should note that Senator Lemieux was a guest on our election night coverage in both the Florida primary and the general election. Safe to say, much has changed for the senator since then. We wish him well. And that's our program for tonight. From New York, For HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net. Tonight, the secrets behind Iran's Manhattan Project.
They were stripping the identification so that the New York banks did not know that this was Iranian money.
And Iran's back door to the West.
His direct quote to me was, "But Mr. John, those are your sanctions, not ours."
Plus, a brand new United States Senator is welcomed to Washington. A senator who didn't receive a single vote.
You're a seat warmer, true or
No,
untrue?
not true. I'm going to try to get 6 years worth of work in a 16-month period.
We'll bring you the news next on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. According to new reports, Iran is on the brink of developing a nuclear bomb, a nightmare scenario for Washington and a game-changing accomplishment for Tehran. And not just because the Islamic Republic beat the odds to gather the elusive know-how and rare materials from around the world. Even more surprising is how easily Iran used America's financial markets to pay for these materials. Black market suppliers want U.S. dollars, which are supposed to be nearly impossible for the Iranians to get, since Washington has labeled Tehran the world's top sponsor of terrorism. Sanctions have been in place for decades, trying to isolate the Iranians, but as you will see and hear tonight, those sanctions are not only not working, but also Western banks have been helping the Iranians get.
We're doing whatever we can to make it difficult.
Morgenthau first picked up the billion-dollar money trail at this nondescript office tower on New York's famed Fifth Avenue. For years, federal officials suspected the building's owner had ties to Tehran, but they did nothing. Morgenthau had heard the same thing, but felt he couldn't afford to wait any longer, and his investigators began digging.
So you got to looking into it, and what'd you find?
Well, just basically that they were, we thought, an agent of the Iranian government.
In reporters' vernacular, that would be serving as a front organization.
Right.
Morgenthau's team of investigators discovered the building's real owner is Bank Melli. It's Iran's largest bank, owned by the Iranian government and on a U.S. and European watch list for allegedly playing a part in financing terrorism and nuclear proliferation. For some 20 years, the building had been a cash bonanza for Iran. Unsuspecting tenants were paying millions to the front company that ran the building. But faced with a wall of sanctions, the Iranian bank couldn't get the dollars out of New York without help. And Morgenthau discovered a surprising accomplice, the venerable British bank Lloyd's TSB. And that was just one of many services Lloyd's was providing the Iranian government.
Let me just jump right in and say, what was Lloyd's TSB doing for Iran?
They were stripping the identification so that the New York banks did not know that this was Iranian money. They were just physically stripping the identification on the wire transfers. And they had a room with two people in it, and their only job was to make sure that there was no connection with Iran on these wires.
Get around the rules and get their hands on enormous amounts of money, enough to build a nuclear weapon that Iran could hold over the U.S. and its allies. Few believe Iran when it says its nuclear program is for civilian use. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has made a public show of testing long-range missiles, and experts say his government may be as close as a few months from enriching weapons-grade uranium. But how did Iran manage to get and spend billions of dollars in U.S. currency on the materials it needed, in spite of what are supposed to be ever-tightening sanctions? It happened right here in New York, the very heart of American capitalism. And that doesn't sit well with Manhattan's district attorney. How much money are we talking?
We're talking about $340 million that what they call terminated in the United States,
right.
But then several billion went through New York banks and went elsewhere.
Several billion?
Yeah.
Now, have you seen any correlation between this time period and Iran's alleged progress in its nuclear weapons program?
Well, I mean, I think they coincide.
Robert Morgenthau is the 90-year-old, soon-to-retire district attorney of Manhattan.
Were arrested on an indictment charging them with...
Over more than 30 years in the position, he's defined his career by unraveling sophisticated financial crimes. But this case had special implications for the lives of New Yorkers.
Going back to the lesson of 9/11, I mean, New York is always going to be a prime target for terrorists. We've got to be on the alert here to make sure that...
Kingdom law. I'm frankly amazed by that.
Even more amazing to McKinley was how seemingly brazen Lloyd's was in helping Iran. It was a top-down operation, so ingrained in the bank's routine that there was even a step-by-step manual describing how to launder the Iranian money.
It wasn't some maverick. It was done with full knowledge and full consent at a very high level in Lloyd's TSB. So, well, to put it quite frankly, it stinks.
McKinley was outraged that the British government appeared to be letting the politically influential bank off the hook. He lashed out at Prime Minister Gordon Brown on the floor of the House of Commons.
I think it's a pathetic response of the United Kingdom, and I say I'm disappointed with the Prime Minister. He should have told the Treasury, look, for once, you really got to look into this. This will not do. I'm not going to let him get away with the washing of hands on this issue. It's a very serious matter.
He says that even years into the war on terror, the U.S. and its allies have missed a major gap in their security.
Even in the United States, with all their sophisticated surveillance of the financial sector, financial transactions, intelligence gathering and so on, it seems that this scheme was rumbled almost by accident and at a relatively low level in the Justice Administration. Now, full marks to those who discovered it, but it does raise questions for us all, both in North America and in Europe, as to how sophisticated our intelligence and security operations are. It seems to me they were seriously flawed in this area because it went on for so long.
It went on for 12 years, ending in 2004. But
transfers.
It was classic money laundering, made easy in this era of computerized virtual transactions.
Melly Bank PLC has an account with Lloyd's.
Adam Kaufman, Morgenthau's chief investigator in the case, explained how the scheme worked.
This is something that we put together that represents the type of messages that we saw in the investigation. Right. This is a message from Melly Bank PLC, London, and it's saying to Lloyd's, send this money to a U.S. bank. What's very significant, and this is what we see again and again and again, is at the bottom. What it says is, please do not mention our name to any bank in the USA.
Lloyd's TSB branches in London and Dubai would accept deposits of Iranian rials from Bank Melli and other Iranian banks, disguise or remove information from electronic records that indicated that the source of the money was Iran, and then transfer the money electronically to New York. And why were the Iranians so eager to get American dollars? The theory driving an even deeper investigation is that when Iran goes shopping on the international weapons market, The black market sellers want to do deals in greenbacks, not British pounds, not Japanese yen, and definitely not Iranian rials. For years, Lloyd's helped Iran launder billions of dollars, and nobody noticed.
It seemed to me some people at the very least had been asleep on the job.
Andrew McKinley is a member of the British Parliament. We spoke near his country home outside Belfast. He told us that he's surprised it was an American district attorney and not his own government that brought down the Lloyd's money laundering operation.
The British government are saying that there was not a breach of United